Okay, right at the back there.
Hiya, Ross Smith from the North East Chamber of Commerce. Wanted to ask a question about planning. There's obviously been changes that have been made to the planning system for large-scale energy generation projects, but there's still a lot of renewable energy projects which are decided at more local level, and the overall strategy of a low-carbon economy doesn't seem to be matched by particularly the speed and the timeliness of decisions that are taken on the individual projects which are needed to actually make that happen in reality.
Do you come up against this in your work, Ross?
We did a large report which we published at the end of last year, where we looked at with a lot of businesses involved in this field over the course of the last year, and it was one of the biggest problems and biggest concerns that came up from our members was the delays in the planning process for getting these projects off the ground.
Look, it's tough this, because you're right. Lots of people saw the national policy statements as being somehow taking power away from local communities. The truth is, as you point out, they're essentially about large-scale infrastructure projects. They're not about the smaller-scale projects. They remain with local authorities. I mean, I think in the end this is a battle for hearts and minds with people, because it is right that local authorities can make decisions about planning issues, but you've got to persuade people that the bigger threat to the countryside is not the wind turbine but climate change. Now, the other thing that we are doing, which I think is a fair point that local authorities have made, is we are going to map where are the appropriate places for wind energy, in particular if you're talking about wind energy. Where does the wind blow, where is the maximum effect in terms of wind, where are the environmental dangers biggest? And local authorities are going to have to draw up plans on that basis towards our 15% renewable energy target. So in a way, the deal with local authorities is, look, be part of our plans, which is a national plan for 15% renewable energy by 2020, but do it on the, but you know, we're not saying you've got to accept kind of wind energy places that you think is inappropriate, but it's got to go somewhere. And let's try and do a mapping exercise where it's put in the most appropriate places. So as well as trying to win people over to the general idea, I think that's our suggested way forward in relation to local authorities.
Okay, I've got a question there and then one there, I think. Yep.
Yes, good afternoon, Minister. I'm Mike Hanley, and I'm the Crown Estates contract manager for the Dogger Bank zone in round 3.
Excellent.
So,
don't ask me a difficult question.
Got a bit of a job on my hands.
You're doing a fantastic job, let me say, before you ask your question.
Thank you very much. And if your previous... I've only just started.
I should start saying that to him, actually.
If your previous questioner wants to get in touch with me later on to talk about his question, I'm more than happy to try and engage him with the Crown Estate on that front. We welcome the commitment that you've offered to the support of the offshore wind development. Over the last 3 months, we've been engaging with industry, and most recently yesterday at a very, very successful supply chain advisory event organised by One North East. There's a common question that seems to be coming from people that come to these events, and it's in relation to confidence in the future, certainly taking in mind the election that's on its way.
Yeah. Vote Labour. Sorry.
Nicely put. I think what I'd like to understand is how you think, or where you think your policies and your actions in the future are, to the best of your knowledge, going to differ from those of your learned colleagues.
Well, look, gosh, it's sort of tempting when someone offers you an opportunity to attack your opponents. I mean, my basic view on this...
They can speak for themselves this afternoon. So.
Oh, right, okay, I will attack them then. My basic view about this is that we want as much unity of purpose as possible in this area, because it is long-term, and, you know, governments do change, hopefully not at this election, but it's important, therefore, to construct as much of a national consensus as possible on this. Now, where do I see the consensus hasn't yet been built? Let me put it that way. I think on nuclear, things have moved a long way forward, in my view, because I think nuclear does need to be part of the energy solution of the future. We haven't quite persuaded the Lib Dems, so you can ask them about that. On wind, my anxiety about the Conservative Party is that they have a rather sort of schizophrenic attitude on wind, which is that they sort of say sometimes that they're sort of in favour of it, but lots and lots of people, including Ken Clark, the Shadow Business Secretary, who said that we should have no onshore wind at all, they send out a very, very negative message about it. So my hope is that you can construct a consensus. Of course, you're never going to get consensus around the detail of policy, but a consensus that, look, we need nuclear, we need renewables, we need clean coal, because actually the challenge is sufficiently enormous that we can't reject any of these options. Then you want to try it, so that sort of ends, if you like, and then on means, things like the Infrastructure Planning Commission, you want to construct as much of a consensus as possible that needs to carry on and go forward. I mean, planning, as the questioner earlier asked, has been a big, big frustration for people. I hope that we can establish more of a consensus than we have about the IPC and its continuing role. So in a way, it's for others to speak for themselves, but my absolute wish in this is to construct as much of a consensus as possible.
Question there.
Hello, Joseph Lee, UK Youth Parliament member for Stockton. I just want to ask you, how important is the education of young people, particularly in science, in building this low-carbon economy so that we can have the jobs, local jobs here for apprentices and manufacturers, but also the scientists and the engineers? And if it's important, what are you doing about working with the other departments to improve the standard of particular science education?
No, it is obviously fundamental, and STEM skills, so-called, are very, very important as part of preparing us for the future. And the point of our skills strategy around low carbon is precisely to look at what more do we need to be doing to create the conditions. And I think this is something that in a way, when we talk about the low carbon prospects for the future, we sort of ignore at our peril. So we take it very seriously. I know my colleague Ed Balls takes the teaching of science in schools very seriously. They've made recent steps to recruit more science teachers and make a difference in that area. So it seems to me to be a fundamental part of what we need to do.
Right, I think what's got to be our final question, Alan Donnelly there.
Ed, we had the Secretary General of the European Car Manufacturers Association here a few weeks ago speaking at the NEEF annual dinner. And my company also advised the International Automobile Federation, which represents motorists around the world. And what Ivan Hodash said from the car manufacturers was that while places like the Northeast are doing very well in wiring the region up for the use of electric cars, if someone buys an electric car, they do want to travel further than the southern boundary of the northeast of England. Now in Portugal, the Prime Minister has led an initiative to look to wire the whole of the country so that they can bring in electric cars across the whole of Portugal. The manufacturers tell us that unless governments put in place the infrastructure, in cooperation obviously with the private sector, unless the infrastructure is put in, it could be 2040 before we see electric cars used extensively across the European Union. Now, given what you said earlier about us having needing to take the leading edge in these technologies, what could the government do to try and bring about the wiring of Britain much more quickly?
Well, it's a very good question, Alan, and I suppose I would say watch this space, because this is something that we are looking at very closely. I think it's 6 cities we are doing plug-in points for electric cars. But I take what you say and what the representative you mentioned said very seriously about the need for government. Government doesn't need to do it all, but needs to find a way in which it has a strategy to construct that national infrastructure that you are talking about. So be assured that we are looking very, very hard at this, and we'll be saying more about it soon.
That's it, I think. You've got a cabinet meeting, is that right?
I do, I'm afraid.
To keep you, thanks very much indeed to Ed Milliband.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you. Good to see you.